Hello, and welcome to the ASCM webcast. Learn how to enhance your supply chain skills with demand-driven material requirements planning, DDMRP. My name is Kim Monroe, Marketing Manager at ASCM. Please note that this presentation is being recorded and it will be available on the ASCM website, and you'll be emailed the location. Before we begin, I'd like to run through a few details. At the end of the presentation, we'll save time for a Q&A session. If you look at the right toolbar on your screen, you'll see a questions box. To answer your question at any time during the presentation, simply type it in the box and click send. Should you experience any technical difficulties during today's broadcast, please call GoToWebinar Tech Support at 1-805-617-7000. Again, that's 1-805-617-7000. And now it's my pleasure to pass the mic to Bob Collins to begin today's presentation.
Thank you, Kim. Hi, everyone. This is Bob Collins, Senior Director of Learning and Development for ASCM. Glad to have you all here today. Especially glad to introduce Carol Patak, our primary speaker today, a partner at the Demand Driven Institute, or DDI. Carol has been a recognized expert in supply chain and ERP, past president of APICS, both VP and global industry executive, former academic as well, and definitely a thought leader in the area of demand-driven MRP and demand-driven leadership. So Carol, we're glad to have you here.
Well, thanks, Bob. It's my pleasure.
Yeah. What we'd like to do today, there are several questions that have come pretty regularly to us at ASCM since we've announced our partnership with DDI. And so what we'd like to do is address those questions, and then we'll have time at the end to address a few additional questions.
That sounds great.
So the first question that we've been getting is, why should I consider alternative planning methods? Could you address that, Carol?
I'd love to. And it's sort of a long explanation, and there's not a quick answer. And our answer really is that, well, our times around us have really dramatically changed. Let's think about back to about 1965. You know, I was a little kid. My mom could send me to the grocery store, and I had a choice of two toothpaste. Crest made one, Colgate made the other. And you look at what the criteria were in the supply chain. Our supply chain complexities were really pretty low. Product life cycles were very long. You know, we talk about that product variety, you know, two toothpaste, that's it. Well, think about where we're at today. Do you know that Crest makes 37 and Colgate, I think, makes 42 different kinds of toothpaste? And that doesn't even include the SKU sizes. So as we look at the world we're trying to manage today, it is fundamentally different than where we were in the 1960s. Well, I think we'd all agree with that we're in this new normal of high variability, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. But here's the problem. Our rules, our tools, and our whole planning approach was developed in the 1950s. There's a reason why APICS even exists, was that whole development of saying, you know what, we now have something called a computer, and now we can use it for planning. Well, it hasn't fundamentally changed. Inside the most sophisticated ERP system today is still that same planning engine from the 50s that we codified in the 60s as APICS really started its membership and started its education. So it makes sense that, you know, things have changed a lot since then. And so things have changed in our supply chain. So we really need to think about how we change planning. But let's see if something has not changed. Well, let's see if we agree that we can have too little inventory in our supply chain. And people usually nod their heads and say, well, yeah, that's shortages. But at the same time, we can also have too much inventory. Well, that's excess and obsolete. And the problem is that we really want to be somewhere in the middle. If too little is a bad thing and too much is a bad thing, then obviously somewhere between too little and too much is, well, it's just right. Well, how do we define what is just right? And this is a critical concept to really think about as we look at the evolution of supply chain. That dashed blue line It represents return on investment. If I have too little inventory, I'm impacting revenue because I have shortages. If I have too much inventory, I'm impacting my working capital because I have too much tied up in my inventory assets. So that dashed line represents return on investment. And so that's how we know what is the right amount of inventory to have in the right place. Unfortunately, when we look at traditional planning, the planning that was developed in the 50s for a world that doesn't exist anymore, we see that by definition, we end up with too much of the wrong stuff, too little of the right stuff, and really, frankly, just too much stuff. And so we end up with the problem that we have excess inventory at the same time we have shortages. And every time we run MRP, we go from too little to too much or too much to too little. Any planner will tell you before they go ahead and place an order for anything large, they always take that print screen of what the system told them and put it in their file drawer because they're trying to minimize the number of people they're going to yell at them that day. So what happened? Well, we got into the days of client server, and now we can export everything to our Excel files on our desktops. Well, but it didn't get any better. 90% of the companies worldwide are starting to report this issue. So the bottom line effect is what we're seeing, the symptoms are, we have chronic shortages, right? That's impacting our ability to get things to our customer. And at the same time, we have excess and obsolete inventory. And as we're all problem solvers, we try to get everything out to the customer in time because we truly care about our customers, but we're spending an awful lot of time, money, and frustration, waste to be able to do that. But the problem is really at a much higher level. Let's look at really what the issue is. About 1962, a gentleman in England, he was an American living in England at the time, Jay Forrester started writing about something called the Forrester effect. It's been renamed the bullwhip effect. And so let's take a look at the APICS definition. That means that a small change coming from the customer goes backwards in our supply chain and distorts that demand signal. Anybody that's ever played the MIT beer game knows the impact of that. But the reality is that the bullwhip effect is bidirectional. Any small change on the supply side makes a big change for the customer. So we've got demand signal distortion coming one way and supply continuity variability coming the other way. And the more things we connect together, the worse the effect. And this is what scares me as we start to look at new concepts today like Industry 4.0 and Internet of Things that are telling us that all we need to do is just connect more things together. Well, the more things we connect together, the more delays accumulate, the more gains never do.
Thank you, Carol. That's really helpful, and I've sure seen that in my years in the industry for sure. So another question that has been coming in is, what is demand-driven material requirements planning?
Another great question, Bob. And it's so funny when I talk to people about DDMRP, demand-driven MRP, they say, oh, I don't believe in it. Well, it's not a religion. It's nothing to be believed in or not believed in. It is a methodology. And it's a different kind of methodology because it's built on a different view of supply chain. Traditionally, all of our models of supply chain have been based on the concept of linear finite systems. And demand-driven and everything that we've done in demand-driven is based on the fact that supply chains, well, they're not linear and they never have been. They're complex adaptive systems, which requires a different tool set, different methodology to be able to manage them. So DDMRP is not the destination. It's just the starting point. And it's just a method to model, plan, and manage supply chains. Because no matter how good our planning and execution systems are, it will never overcome a bad supply chain design. So it's a methodology where we model, plan, and manage supply chain to do something that's critically important, and that is to protect and promote flow. Here's an old concept that's come back. We've talked about flow. I remember, Bob, you and I were at a conference. We always heard George Plazel speak. Every time George spoke, he always said all benefits are directly related to the speed of flow of materials and information. Well, he's absolutely right. DDMRP uses something that has been well known in the TOC community for many, many years, and it's been in the APICS dictionary for I think probably about the last 35 years, called strategic decoupling points. What those decoupling points do is it provides a position of independence. It provides a clear break in our supply chain. It absorbs variability from both sides, and it's our primary position for planning. So that drives that supply order generation and execution methodology. The idea of this was first articulated in 2011 when Chad and I wrote the book Orlicky's MRP 3rd edition. We worked very closely with the APICS Detailed Planning and Scheduling Committee, and this was written as an APICS certification reference. And you can see on the front of that cover is really what supply chains look like. They're three-dimensional web-like structures, and DDMRP is a planning and execution methodology designed for that. In 2016, we wrote the DDMRP book, pulled it out. Now, it's really interesting, Bobby, now you and both and I have lived through what we call the land of or. You know, where we either did lean, or we did TOC, or we did Six Sigma, or we did MRP. You know, because you're a Jonah like I am, you know, and we were told you couldn't do both. And you remember the lean folks coming to the APICS conferences with their buttons that used to say MRP with the not symbol through them? And we all knew. We thought, you know, if we thought that was bad now, take MRP away from us, it's going to be worse. What DDMRP is built on is it's built on all those pillars. It's built through the land of and, all right, not the land of or. It is the land of and. So that what we want to do is we want to be able to leverage all the things that we know to accelerate the kind of improvements that we're seeing. So it's not just pure pull like we would think of in terms of lean. It is position, protect, and pull. What it does is it says we need to figure out where these strategic decoupling points go. We need to protect them, and then we need to pull through them. So there's 5 components of DDMRP. These are in prerequisite order. The first one is where do we position? You know, for years we've been focused on how much to order and when, and instead we really need to be focused on that design. Where does that strategic positioning go? And then how much inventory do we need to put there so that it decouples, it absorbs variability from both sides, and provides our primary position for planning? And how do we dynamically adjust that over time? Those are what we call master settings, and that's the output of a demand-driven sales and operations planning process. Now, that's a tactical planning process that looks at our strategy and how do we convert that to operational planning, and then how do we take operational capability and communicate that back to strategy. That's something we've never had before, that kind of bi-directional tactical reconciliation. Once that's done, then the easy part, planning and execution. Very simple and easy to understand how to do that. The cross-functional work is in those first 3 steps of position and protect. So there's really 4 basic innovations that made this thing all hang together, because we understand formal planning very well, TOC very well, lean very well, and Six Sigma very well. But the problem is we've been stuck in our silos. So how do we get out of the land of or and join together in the land of and? Well, the first one, we say, well, decoupled lead time. Well, let's borrow from project management. When we look at project management, the length of the project is determined by the critical path. Well, we know that in formal planning, we had to put everything on the critical path, because when do you plan materials? Early start date or late start date? Well, the decoupling points, when we insert them, allow us to now put slack in that bill of material. And so the longest time between decoupled positions is called the decoupled lead time. That's the lead time that's used for planning, because our manufacturing lead time is too short. It assumes that everything is available at time of order release, and that all orders can be started and completed on their own. Well, how often is that true? The second one is the planning equation. Rather than trying to take a master production schedule, a statement of what I can and will build, which is usually based on a forecast, take that out into the future and say, okay, 22 weeks from now on Tuesday, I expect to make this, and then back schedule into a release date. DDMRP uses a forward schedule where every day it looks at, what do I have? What have I got coming to me? What's my qualified demand? What's due to ship today? Do I have anything past due, and will I have a qualified spike? Orders are released and they're always scheduled forward. So all those orders that were past due for release, they can't exist anymore because everything's scheduled forward and always full lead time. The third is what's called decoupled explosion. Once I've released that order, well, how do I plan materials? Well, the explosion works exactly like MRP. Please don't throw out MRP with the bathwater. It's like the baby. You know, we took a lot of criticism for calling the planning engine DDMRP, but MRP's still in there. Don't forget all what you know. Decoupled explosion, we explode until you hit the next stocking buffer, and then it stops, no matter what. The fourth one is relative priority. And Bob, you and I have both been in the position of being planners, and you get that huge planner report and you say, what do I do first? And I used to teach my planners, well, you know, do ATP violation, at least somewhere in there is a customer order. Well, with DDMRP, relative priority is very easy. It's color first, percentage second. You can see a planner's report here. It's very clear to that planner that part 406P, that's got the highest planning priority because it's in the red with only 19.8% left. So a single planner can manage many more parts and with a lot easier time doing that. So what are the critical differences between MRP and DDMRP? MRP is still in there, but there's some differences. MRP can't decouple. Remember, when we first invented MRP, we only had about 12K of memory and 4 tape drives. So we had to make everything dependent. DDMRP, now we can plan through these strategically determined decoupling points that determine our customer lead time and our inventory investment. MRP was never designed to manage stock positions. Its happy place is 0, that I have everything precisely in quantity and timing. DDMRP, because we understand that having some inventory in the supply chain is really a prerequisite to maximizing our ROI, we never want to let those strategic stock positions go to 0. And it'd be like allowing firewalls in your company to be ripped out. Not a good idea. Most safety stock positions are static. You set it and forget it. You don't ever want to go through that again. Where DDMRP, they dynamically adjust automatically based on changes in our average daily usage, lead times, and categories, but also for things like seasonality and product introduction and product discontinuance. And MRP, as we all know, we've struggled with this, trying to figure out how do I use that safety stock? And in effect, safety stock now becomes dead inventory. DDMRP, those buffers, the safety that's embedded in that buffer is always used. And if it isn't, those buffers adapt down. Now, MRP, because it's driven from a forecast, every time there's a small change in the parent, we know that it's going to bubble on down through that entire bill of materials. And in fact, my first APICS meeting 40 years ago, that is hard to believe. It's been over 40 years that I've been associated with APICS. And it was on system nervousness. We knew it was a problem back then, but we didn't know how to fix it. So under DDMRP, supply order generation is tied to the best demand signal we've got, which is actual demand. MRP gives us priority by due date. Well, there's a forecasted order by a forecasted date, and then let's run around and try to make sure everything runs according to that. Well, it works if we're in a perfect world, but I've been at this a long time, and I've never been in a perfect world. So we need those buffers because we live in that imperfect world. And DDMRP gives us priority by buffer status, color first, percentage second. So we get to say goodbye to the bimodal distribution. No longer do we have too much of the wrong stuff and too little of the right stuff, and overall too much stuff. We now have the ability through a bidirectional, demand-driven, adaptive enterprise methodology to take strategy and translate it into operational capability and be able to understand what our operational capability is and exploit that for strategic advantage. It brings supply chain to the table of the senior level executives because we're now speaking their language, and that's the language of return on investment. So DDMRP is proven in a variety of industries, all up and down the volume variety matrix, from very, very high volume, low variety to very low volume, high variety. And it allows companies to plan and execute in that optimal range where we want to be, where we're going to maximize that return on investment. So that's our happy place. Now, here's some of the benchmarks. This was done by a company out of Germany, Camelot, one of our thought leaders over there. And you can see by different industry types, as I said, it's up and down the entire volume variety matrix, from life sciences to chemicals to consumer packaged goods to industrial manufacturing. How different could these companies all be? And you can see the average inventory reduction, as well as best in class, as well as service level increase and lead time reduction. And this is not a trade-off. This is not a balanced scorecard. This is all together at the same time, we get all these benefits.
That's great, Carol. Thanks. And it's really obvious once you explain it how DDMRP can really help solve a lot of the issues that those of us who are, or in my case were, a planner and a materials management worry about on a day-to-day basis. So the third question that we often get is, how do I get started?
An excellent question. It's a very easy question to answer because it's education. You know, how much money have we wasted on software and consulting services, and we don't spend the money on our people? Our number one as manager is we have to develop our people. I can't just take somebody and throw them in the cockpit of a brand new airplane and say, fly it. Well, you've ridden in the back before, haven't you? Well, that's a lot different than flying the plane. So it's a 2-day course. And the first course is the demand-driven planner course. And it really works out a couple things. It's very quick, it's 2 days, and it answers some very critical questions. And the first is just really understanding what is the problem. You know we've been pushing this problem for years. And the planners that get in there and say, I always wondered why it didn't work. I thought it was me. And no, it's not you. It's not your fault. It's intuitive. The other comments that we always get is, I've done lots of this stuff already. And the answer is, of course you have, or you wouldn't have survived. The other thing we get from people that attend, they say, oh, if I do this, that means that I can also do that. And it allows us, most importantly, Bob, and I think this is the critical thing, companies that have invested in their APICS education, it leverages that education. It doesn't say, oh no, forget everything you know. It leverages it from everything that Jed and I have written, from that very first book in 2011, where we worked very closely with the Detailed Planning and Scheduling Committee, to today. Everything is leveraged off of the APICS body of knowledge. Those are the bricks. That's the foundation that's under there. So it's a 2-day class. Well, there's 2 opportunities for you. And what we see a lot is companies usually want to send a scout, you know, 1 or 2 people that just go check it out. Is this thing real, or is, you know, are they smoking something over there? So those are the public courses. And go to the website and look for the demand-driven planner courses that are in your area. Now, DDP goes very, very deep into DDMRP. Right? It gives you the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you need to do a proof of concept pilot in your company. Now, also, what we've seen a lot with many American companies like Moog and GKN is that in-house, where we can send trainers into your company. And so that course is all for your people. And that's a great way to kick off a project. And then at the end of the class, we'll tell you, we'll say, don't believe us, try it. Try a proof of concept pilot in your company, you know, and see if it works for you.
Wonderful. You know, we wanted to take a little time for some additional questions. Those of you who are watching this pre-recorded webinar can actually submit your questions by selecting the question tab on the toolbar on the right side of your screen. Enter your question and click send. We will be accumulating all of those questions, and we will create an FAQ document from them that we will be posting with the recorded presentation over time. So if you have questions, please let us know. We'll be happy to address them. But Carol, since it's just you and me at the moment, there were a couple of questions that, additional questions that we've gotten that we could probably address. The first is, how do I convince my boss that DDP training is worth it?
And that is a great question. And the reality of the answer is talk your boss's language. Speak what your boss thinks. And that's speak in terms of return on investment. And when you look at an educational opportunity where you're going to go to an education for 2 days, and what can you do when you come back? Well, let me tell you some stories. Laurent Vigoureau, French operations manager, came to the 2-day DDP class. 6 months later, he had taken €500,000 out of his inventory and improved his customer service to 99.9%. His bosses couldn't believe it. They said that all came from a 2-day class. So when you go back, do that proof of concept pilot and show the bottom line return that you're going to improve customer service, reduce inventory, all at the same time. And the advantage for you is you have a lot less stress that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So it's a good win-win for both you and your boss. So talk about return on investment. Go tell them how you're going to improve customer service and reduce inventory at the same time. And they'll probably look at you like you're crazy and you say, well, do you want to take that risk and not go? Or do you want to join hundreds of companies that are around the world? And look at the case studies on our website, on the demanddriveninstitute.com site, and look at a case study that's similar to your company and take that into your boss. That's a great way to sell it. Or even better, if you find one of those case studies and they're a competitor, you probably better take it into them because look out.
You know, Carol, some of those responses for the individual who wants to take a class would be pretty similar to how they might approach the senior executive in order to sell DDP training enterprise-wide.
Absolutely. And we've had some wonderful companies like Shell Lubricants and Moog that have brought this in-house. We just did an in-house class with Caterpillar and with Microvention, and it's a wonderful way to kickstart an implementation because it puts everybody on the same page. Companies like Moog, they did their education in-house and they did it in Buffalo, New York, and in California, and in Wolverhampton, England, and in Baguio, Philippines. You know, it's easy for a trainer to travel, much easier to travel one person than to travel all your people to a public class. So from an economic perspective, it's a wonderful opportunity to get everybody on the same page, hear the same message, and kickstart your implementation. The important thing is that the results from the time you do your conference room pilot to results. I had the opportunity to speak to a CEO of an aerospace company. He said, so when do you think that we'll see some kind of change? He said, you figure what, a year, 18 months? And I looked at him and I said, 6 to 8 weeks. He said, Carol, you don't understand. We're an aerospace company. I said, you don't understand. I spent most of my career in aerospace. I know. You're going to see results. You're going to see the needle move in customer service and inventory in 6 to 8 weeks. And indeed they did. So that's what's an opportunity for you. And for you as the planner, like I said, it is much less stressful. You're now starting to manage your company using process focus rather than using transaction focus. And process management is so much easier and so much less stress associated with that.
Absolutely. So the last question we're going to ask during this presentation is, what is the next step once you are trained? In other words, how do you get to the end result with DDMRP from where you are currently?
Where you're at currently is the first thing that you do is take the planning data that you're currently using today. I have a lot of companies that say, well, we don't do MRP properly, so we can't do DDMRP. No, MRP is not a prerequisite for DDMRP. Take the 2-day training. You're going to get the tools, the knowledge, the skill and ability in that class to go back and do your proof of concept pilot. Pick something that's hard. And I know that probably sounds a little strange. Usually people say, well, pick something that's easy to prove it out. Our advice is always pick something hard that you've never been able to solve before and try that. A product line that always causes you problem, a product that you're always out of, a line that you always have too much inventory of, or that you're constantly in a problem on. Do that one first and learn by doing. So just pick that product line, pick a pilot and get on with it and then build on that success. I think that's the most important thing. Don't try to say you're going to go do the company all in one shot. Learn by doing. Try a pilot, learn from that, take the next product line or the next area and do that. Now, it's always interesting to find out what a small pilot is. Michelin, the French tire company, they kicked off with 22 vice presidents in the 2-day class. And to them, a small pilot was their tire plant in Spain. But I guess when you have 67 plants worldwide, a whole tire plant's probably a small pilot in their mind. And that's how they started. And they've been rolling through all their plants around the world. And now they're starting to connect their plants to each other. And every time you do that, you get a benefit. And it's a very quick benefit. You see results within a couple months after you make that change. So that really gives you the momentum to keep going. So try it, learn from it, try it again, learn more from it.
That's great. Makes absolute sense. Don't try and boil the ocean. not at first.
Exactly.
So Carol, I want to thank you for making time to speak with us today and to help us create this presentation. Thank you.
I appreciate the invitation. Thanks, Bob.
And I'd like to thank all of the folks out there that are watching this presentation, participating with us in this webcast. As a reminder, this presentation is available on the ASCM website, and we do recommend that you share this with other folks in your company who want to know more about DDMRP and demand-driven planning. All content and materials included in this ASCM webcast are the property of ASCM and is protected by the United States and international copyright laws. All rights are reserved.